Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Adriana Alcalde didn't like her son's choice. Constancio was already an adult. He had completed his education, earned a living, and lived on his own in the apartment that Adriana had inherited from her mother. Holding a photo from the dresser in her hands, she sighed involuntarily. In the snapshot, Constancio was captured on his graduation day from school. He was cheerful, handsome, and stately. And how he was sitting in that photo, it was an absolute sight to behold. Adriana had specifically ordered an expensive suit and trousers from a tailor's shop. She wanted Constancio to shine at his graduation. And he couldn't have anything less. He was one of the top students from a prestigious high school. And he had to look the part. How the girls used to admire Constancio back then. A mother's heart swelled with pride, and Constancio wasn't shy in a female company. He communicated with girls openly and freely, not like most of his peers. Constancio, in general, was always the life of the party. During his childhood, Adriana had to keep an eye on this boy. With such a volatile nature, trouble was never far off. The forest was everywhere near their house. He sought out adventures, and he found them. Adriana fretted over her only child and tried to secure the apartment. And yet, at the age of 3, the boy managed to stick a knitting needle into the socket. He was electrocuted pretty badly. His tender palms were instantly covered in burns, and it was a miracle he didn't perish. Adriana cried while holding her crying son, not even realizing that this was just the beginning. In the future, Constancio fell many times, from trees and from fences. Once, he even got a concussion. The neighborhood dogs bit him, and he had accidents while riding his bicycle. One can't recount everything. He was a troublesome lad. And all because Constancio couldn't stand just sitting at home. He was drawn to the outdoors, to friends, and to adventures. And what kind of person did he turn out to be? Adriana Alcalde herself had always been an exemplary girl. She listened to her parents and was afraid to frighten them unnecessarily. She chose a spouse who matched her nature. Samuel Alcalde, Constancio's father, was also never known for his wild temperament. But Constancio was just like that. But Adriana even took pride in the fact that her son had such a vibrant personality. He always had so many friends and admirers. He wasn't some gray mouse. He was outgoing and the life of the party. From very early childhood, Adriana knew that her son Constancio was better and smarter than the others. After all, he was already reading at the age of 3, and neither mother nor father put any special effort into teaching the little one. He figured it out on his own. Constancio always asked questions. What's written here? What letter is this? And slowly, steadily, he learned. Adriana and Samuel were shocked when their 3-year-old child once read a sign outside a store. No one expected it. Maybe he just memorized it, doubted the father, suspiciously looking at the little one. The parents immediately tested their hypothesis. But no, little Constancio confidently read the names of bus stops and the inscriptions on billboards. A bit later, Constancio learned to count as well, also independently. The boy just had that kind of nature. He was curious and eager for everything new. Sometimes it led to dangerous adventures, and sometimes to academic successes. Adriana was incredibly pleased with her child's abilities. By the time the first year of the school came around, it was clear that Constancio had no place in a regular school. Adriana put in maximum effort but still managed to enroll her son in the most prestigious school in their city. They had to pay someone off, but it was nothing. Their family was already quite well off by then. When Adriana married Samuel, he was a poor student. She didn't dream of a wealthy prince herself, as she came from a rather modest family. She lived with her mother and father in a small apartment and worked as an accountant at a factory after graduating from college. There was a period when all her friends started getting married one by one. One would invite her to a wedding, then another. And Adriana was always alone, even though she had a quite pleasant appearance. Perhaps she was too serious back then, too strict. And very modest. But the guys preferred to get to know simpler and more vibrant girls. From the outside, it seemed that Adriana was quite comfortable being alone. But it wasn't the case. And then there was Samuel. They met at a dance at his university. He approached Adriana only towards the end of the evening and, blushing and embarrassed, asked her to dance. At first glance, the slim young man didn't impress the girl, but she agreed. And so she had been standing by the wall alone for too long. During the dance, they talked and got to know each other better. And when the music stopped, Adriana looked at her partner completely differently. He was intelligent, polite, kind, reliable, and focused on his studies and career. Even then, Adriana felt that she wouldn't go wrong with such a person. And her intuition didn't fail her. They started dating. A year later, Samuel proposed to Adriana. He was still finishing his studies at the university and working part-time as an assistant engineer at a construction company. The girl thought about it and agreed. Why wait? All her friends were already married. She liked Samuel, and her parents didn't object. In fact, her mother was even happy, finally, her daughter was settled. And their prospective son-in-law suited them just fine. He was well-mannered, respectful, and a future engineer. As a young couple, they were provided with university housing. They received a small room with shared facilities and a kitchen on the entire floor. Strangely enough, Adriana even liked such a life. She learned to be a wife and a homemaker. She felt very grown up, and Samuel was there, dependable and loving. With him, the young wife felt beautiful and charming. He showered her with compliments and bought her inexpensive gifts. Back then, there wasn't enough money for anything more significant. Scholarships, wages, part-time jobs, there wasn't much to spare. And then Samuel graduated from university and landed a full-time job at a construction company where he had worked as a student. His potential was noticed right away, and his career began to advance. His career growth positively impacted his salary. Soon, the spouses were able to move into their own apartment, and Samuel's workplace helped with its acquisition. It's a pity we didn't have a child in time. Samuel would joke and express his regret. We could have gotten a 2-bedroom. And indeed, it was sad. Unlike her husband, Adriana took it seriously at the time. Why is it? Don't worry. Samuel hugged her. We have everything ahead. There will be children and a bigger apartment. Just wait a little. And indeed, Samuel kept his promise. Soon enough, he learned how to provide for their small family. Adriana had never lived so well, even at her parents' home. Now she could buy herself beautiful dresses and shoes from those stores she used to avoid due to their high prices. But the items there were magnificent. Furthermore, the spouses often dined out at restaurants or flew to the seaside for vacations at least once a year. They even bought their own car. After all, Samuel was now a manager, and the company was actively expanding. Profits were steadily growing, and the diligent and promising specialist was well taken care of financially. He was valued and respected at work. Samuel was indeed an effective worker. One thing clouded their happiness: they were unable to conceive a child. Samuel didn't despair. He would say that their time would come. Everything will happen in due time. They're young and healthy. Why worry? He'd reassure. But Adriana was still worried. Her friends' children were already in kindergarten, and some were even in school. And here she was. Adriana pretended that everything was fine, and in response to tactless questions from relatives and friends, she'd say that they weren't planning to have children just yet. But the heart of the young woman was troubled and pained. She longed to become a mother. She and Samuel could provide so much for a child: a separate room, toys, clothes, entertainment. And most importantly, love and care. It was frustrating that things were turning out this way. Doctors shrugged their shoulders. It seemed both spouses were healthy. Well, medical science wasn't as advanced back then as it is now. In secret from her husband, Adriana turned to a grandmotherly healer. She had heard about her at work. A colleague assured her that her relative became a mother only after visiting this old woman. She's a magician, really, she works wonders. She can heal anything in the world. They say she can even get the hopelessly sick back on their feet. Adriana, of course, asked for the address of this miracle maid. She said that her cousin needed help with removing warts. But Adriana went to the healer with a completely different request. There were darkened rooms and the smell of dried herbs and wax in the house. A frail old woman was looking at her attentively with her black eyes. "I see your trouble," the old woman declared right from the doorstep. "You can't have a child for now, but there's no real issue. There's nothing for me to do here." "How can that be?" Adriana was surprised, thinking that she might be suffering from some serious condition. "I can't become pregnant. It happens like that sometimes. Just wait, everything will come in due time." The old woman sounded just like Samuel. Adriana wasn't prepared to hear this. After all, she had traveled almost 2 hours to this village in hopes of receiving some remedy. That's what the young woman told the healer, almost on the verge of tears. "This youth these days." The healer chuckled. "Well, okay, here's some dried herb. Add it to your coffee and drink it on an empty stomach every day for 2 weeks." "Thank you." Adriana rejoiced. Now she had the remedy in her hands, which meant her trip to this remote place hadn't been in vain. And indeed, just a month after that visit, Adriana realized she was expecting a child. The joy of the young couple knew no bounds. She didn't know what to think. Did the magical coffee really help, or did things just work out on their own? But that didn't matter. The most important thing was that they would have a baby. Like most women, Adriana dreamed of having a daughter, a little obedient doll with whom she could braid her hair and dress up in pretty clothes. But they had Constancio, a strong and vocal infant who was demanding and very active. The moment Adriana saw the baby, she understood he was the most important person in her life. She would do everything to ensure that this little one would be happy. During that time, Samuel hardly ever came home. He was starting his business. It was quite a risky step, but he went for it, and his wife supported him. She was always by her husband's side and trusted him in all important matters. The quiet and unassuming young man turned out to be intelligent, determined, and resourceful. He could see opportunities perfectly and knew what he wanted. Adriana had no doubt that her husband would achieve success sooner or later. And what about her? She would help him in any way she could. After all, it was all for their future and for their son as well. Samuel physically couldn't help his wife with the baby, even though he really wanted to. He would come home when the little one was already asleep, and sometimes Adriana too. Well, the woman didn't complain. Taking care of the baby brought her joy. The prospects that Samuel had were uplifting and inspiring. Samuel's business was on the rise. At first, it was a company focused on building renovations, and then they shifted into construction. Initially, they started small, private plots and houses. And then things escalated. Samuel managed to enter the business of constructing high-rise buildings in their city. And that's when the earnings really took off. Adriana's head would spin sometimes thinking about how much their lives had changed. Not that they had complained about poverty. As the head of a department, Samuel was earning quite well. But becoming the owner of a company indeed made him wealthy. The family moved to a beautiful suburban house with a pool, and they had a substantial amount on their bank account. Samuel suggested that Adriana quit her job, but she didn't want to. She enjoyed knowing that she was controlling the financial flows and helping her husband in his business. Everything was just wonderful. Constancio grew up, delighting his parents with his academic and sports achievements. The business thrived and brought in profits. The relationship between the spouses was fantastic. They became partners and supported each other. And then, out of the blue, a crisis hit, and competitors took advantage of their vulnerable moment. In short, Samuel lost his company. It happened just as Constancio was finishing school. The man struggled with what had occurred. Adriana understood her husband. After all, the company had been his brainchild, nurtured from infancy, and made strong and prosperous. And now the company was in the hands of their competitors. Adriana wasn't worried about their financial well-being. They had savings, and with Samuel's experience, he wouldn't be left without a job. And that's exactly what happened. Her husband soon found a position at the same company where he had once started. Of course, they hired him for a leadership role. It wasn't his own business, but it wasn't bad either. In some ways, it was even better and more stable. Their standard of living remained the same. Well, to be fair, they no longer had that hefty bank account. It was a pity, but still, a great deal of their money had always gone into developing the business. So Adriana concluded for herself that they hadn't lost anything. And so, they lived well. There was no reason to complain. Meanwhile, Constancio finished school and got into university on a government scholarship. The young man chose his major independently. He wanted to study law. He had always been so determined, self-assured, and fearless. Constancio didn't resemble his father at all. In his youth, Samuel was quiet, unassuming, and serious. He spent most of his time studying. But Constancio managed to do it all. He finished school with flying colors, had girlfriends, and had friends. He was active, cheerful, and handsome. Adriana couldn't help but wonder, how did they manage to raise such a young man? He was just perfect. He was good at everything, absolutely everything. He even got himself into the university. Of course, acquaintances didn't believe it. They thought his father had pulled strings and greased palms. But Constancio did it on his own. He was smart, wowing people with his abilities from a young age. Although Adriana's motherly heart worried about her son, how would he manage without them in a big city? He was used to living with the family's support. Adriana kept a close eye on him, monitoring his movements. How else could she do it? After all, she was his mother. And Constancio had a character with a touch of adventure mixed in. No doubt, he would mature and become calmer with time. But for now, she watched him closely. He was sociable, and she hoped he wouldn't fall into a bad crowd. From childhood, Constancio was drawn to fun and adventures, though sometimes that led to trouble. Adriana didn't want to let her only son go to the capital alone, even though she understood that the university was a whole different level compared to local colleges. Come on, don't worry so much. Ease up a bit. Samuel reassured her. Our boy is smart. He got into such a prestigious university on his own. Besides, he's not a little kid anymore. Are you planning on being around him forever? Remember me. I was even younger when I came here from the village. I went to college first, then university. I was a teenager and nothing happened to me. Adriana would just sigh. What's the point of comparing Constancio and Samuel? They had completely different personalities. And her husband doesn't feel and understand their son the same way she does as a mother. Therefore, he's not worried. Of course, Constancio was mature enough for his age, and she had no doubt about his intellectual abilities. But his character worried her. If Constancio was left without parental control and set free, he might stop studying and get into trouble. He's young, sociable, and lively. Too much freedom might go to his head, and then trouble wouldn't be far off. But Constancio nevertheless went to the capital. Adriana was worried and called her son every day. He would jokingly report that everything was going well. He was studying, managing his daily life, and quite content with his life. The mother's heart found some peace for a while. Things seemed to be going fine, and Constancio was managing. Both she and Samuel had succeeded. They had raised an intelligent and responsible son, and he was quite the handsome young man too. The next step was to get him through his education and marry him off. Then they could relax, as their parental mission had been accomplished successfully. Once upon a time, Samuel and Adriana dreamed of having a large family, planning for 2 or 3 children. Financially, they could certainly afford it. However, when Constancio was born, Adriana suddenly realized that she didn't want to divide her attention among multiple children. Even though they had enough money to provide a decent future for several children, she didn't want to divide her attention, love, care, and time among them. You couldn't buy those things in any store. No, Adriana mused, looking at the then still little child. Let Constancio be our only child. It must hurt to see your parents have a new baby and forget about you. It's not the way it really is, Samuel protested. He had grown up in a large family. On the contrary, my siblings and I had fun together. But Adriana stood her ground, and Samuel didn't argue. He was busy developing his business at the time, and the issue of childbirth didn't particularly concern him. And so it turned out that Constancio remained the only child in the family. Adriana regretted this decision for the first time when her son left home. Who would she care about? Who would she cook delicious meals for, iron shirts for, and knit warm socks for? Samuel, as always, was consumed by work. He wasn't particularly fond of care. He wasn't used to being cared for. What if they had another son or daughter? But Constancio was distancing himself, becoming more mature and independent. Before, he used to call every day and share news, or at least happily respond to his mother's calls. Now it was different. Hello, everything's fine, I have to go. Conversations between mother and son rarely lasted longer than a minute. And then Constancio stopped picking up the phone altogether, and communication practically dwindled to nothing. Adriana missed him and worried. How was her dear child doing in that big city that was so far away? Was anyone mistreating him? Constancio sounded so sad, cold, and distant. Adriana shared her concerns with her husband, but he waved them off. It was just another check he had to pass or a project to complete. The man lived for his work, and he worked not only for money but also because he enjoyed what he did. Adriana saw that Samuel was genuinely passionate about his work. As for her, Adriana herself didn't have such a calling. She merely passed the time at the office, waiting for one call after another and eager to return home. She went to work just to be part of a group. Among her colleagues, Adriana found distractions. Her friends shared life stories and discussed news, some sort of social life. After all, who wants to sit at home within four walls all day? What else was there to do? Compared to the child-rearing problems her colleagues talked about, Adriana had a perfect situation. Some had their children expelled from college, others had daughters who got pregnant at 16. But Adriana's situation was great. Constancio was a smart boy. He got into a prestigious university on his own. He was managing his studies and everyday problems. He was simply excellent. Everyone envied Adriana when she spoke about her son. Of course, she didn't share all her worries with her colleagues. After all, they had a certain relationship. She wanted to look better and more significant in their eyes. Adriana didn't tell anyone that Constancio had become reserved and withdrawn. He didn't answer questions, he spoke to his parents coldly, and he only called to ask for money. Something was definitely happening in his life. Even though Samuel brushed off his wife's worries, he had never felt for his son the way she did as a mother. Leave the boy alone. Samuel would get annoyed. He doesn't want to talk to us because you keep bothering him with your care. Constancio deliberately moved far away from us to become independent. Don't interfere. Adriana would just sigh. Maybe Samuel was right about something, but Constancio wasn't all that independent, not in everything. Of course, they still provided for him from start to finish. Life in the capital wasn't cheap, but his parents could afford to make their student son's life as comfortable as possible. They rented an apartment and gave him a monthly sum for living expenses, and that was a substantial amount. Besides, in Constancio's age, Samuel didn't even dream of such pleasures in life. When Samuel was a student, he worked while Constancio could relax and focus on his studies. The problem was that Constancio needed more and more money. His father set a monthly limit for him, an amount that was many times larger than the average salary in the city. Samuel rightfully believed that Constancio should manage with that amount. But he couldn't. Constancio often asked his mother to send him money. He needed to pay for a seminar, or the washing machine broke down, or something else came up. There were always reasons. Just don't tell Dad, Constancio pleaded. Adriana understood her son. He felt a bit embarrassed that his parents were still supporting him despite being an adult. Constancio wanted to appear more independent and responsible in front of his father. Adriana would transfer money from her own salary, and she wouldn't tell Samuel about it, but Constancio asked her to. The fact that they shared this secret pleased her. It somehow brought them closer. After all, Constancio had become quite reserved and secretive, so this was something. During that period, he reluctantly answered questions about his life. Yeah, everything's fine. I'm studying and hanging out with friends. Everything's good. And what about a girlfriend? Do you have one? Mom, I'll figure it out myself, okay? Initially, Constancio would still come to his hometown, but after the third year of his studies, these visits stopped. All communication was reduced to rare and uninformative phone conversations. Adriana was worried, especially since she was almost sure that her son was facing problems. Otherwise, why did he sound so sad? And why did he need so much money every month? Maybe we should visit him unexpectedly? The woman asked her husband. Why? He puzzled. Why meddle in an adult boy's life? You'll just push him away even more. This is just the process of separation. It's normal for boys. Don't interfere. I'm worried about him. Something's not right there. Stop it. Everything's fine with Constancio. If there were problems, we would have known by now. So, leave your panic behind. He's grown up and smart. He'll figure things out himself. Adriana was annoyed that her husband was so calm. Samuel seemed indifferent to the fate of their only child, almost out of sight, out of mind. Apart from his work, her husband didn't show much interest. Adriana had decided that Constancio would settle in the capital. Why not? He clearly liked the city. He was so excited when he first moved there. He used to share his impressions with his parents, and he was a capable and promising young man. He'd surely find his place in the capital. On one hand, it was great, but on the other, they would hardly see each other anymore. Adriana had mixed feelings. Constancio didn't share his plans with her. One thing made her happy. Constancio's alienation and coldness seemed to have faded gradually. His voice became more friendly, and he even started taking an interest in his parents' affairs, which hadn't happened in a while. But he spoke vaguely about his future. Graduation is coming up soon, and then I'll come back and tell you everything. There's a surprise waiting for you. The word surprise intrigued and worried her. What had Constancio planned? Well, at least Adriana was beginning to recognize her son again, the cheerful adventurer and joker. Constancio did indeed come back. But not alone, he brought his fiancée. Adriana understood, of course, that her grown son had some kind of relationship. But for it to be this serious, to have a fiancée right away. Valentina didn't make a good impression on his future mother-in-law at first glance. She seemed to be a gray mouse. Despite being from the capital, she dressed modestly and tastelessly. Thin, even somewhat frail. What could have attracted Constancio's attention to her? He had always liked vibrant beauties, and there was nothing special to look at here. Well, Valentina did have beautiful eyes and a decent smile, an open and wide one. But still, the more Adriana got to know Valentina, the more concerned she became. It turned out that the girl came to the capital from some village. She got into a third-rate college and graduated from it. She couldn't find a job in her field of study and found nothing better than becoming a waitress in a bar. That's where she and Constancio met. No, seriously, did you hear that? Adriana whispered indignantly to Samuel when they were alone. Their house was spacious, and Constancio's room was on a different floor, so the younger generation couldn't hear them. Nevertheless, Adriana continued to whisper. I actually like Valentina, she's a good girl. Not like those modern, flashy ones, Samuel agreed. And besides, not everything happens right away. Remember me? I was also a village boy, and then I achieved everything myself. That's the thing, you've achieved everything on your own, Adriana complained. You got into university, worked like crazy, labored. And now this girl wants to ride into a comfortable life on someone else's back. She saw that the boy came from a wealthy family and pounced on him like a piranha. But really, does Constancio have no sense? Can't he see it? There's nothing there to look at. Has she put a spell on him or something? Are you creating panic over nothing again? The main thing is that Constancio likes Valentina. And she doesn't have to please you, you won't live with her anyway. Adriana had to agree with her husband's words. Indeed, next to Valentina, Constancio looked calm and content. He held her hand tenderly, cared for her, and was attentive. Adriana had never seen her son like this before. Girls used to chase after him, and he didn't have to do anything. But it turned out that Constancio could be gallant and considerate, quite a surprising discovery. He really had changed and matured. And his gaze had transformed significantly. Something new had appeared in him, some kind of wisdom. Independent life truly changes people, turning boys into men. And Constancio had already made an important decision. He informed his parents that he and Valentina were going to get married soon. Maybe he'd change his mind? Why get married now? He wasn't the right age. He had just finished university. He should be thinking about his career, not a wedding. But Adriana couldn't find understanding from her husband even here. He reminded her of the past once again. Well, look at you. When did we get married? I was still studying, and we were even younger. Those were different times. Times are always the same. Leave the boy alone, he's grown up now. He has the right to make his own decisions. Constancio and Valentina moved into Adriana's apartment. The living space had been empty and unused anyway. The woman didn't object. It was better for them to live far away. It was getting increasingly difficult for her to feign friendliness towards Valentina. Everything about her future daughter-in-law annoyed Adriana, her way of speaking, moving, dressing, her unpleasant voice, and her plain appearance. What else could she expect from a village girl? A simple girl who suddenly decided to become a princess. Valentina's stories about her family and fate made Adriana depressed. There was nothing to cling to. The girl was born into a large family, and her childhood and youth were spent in the village. She milked cows and worked in the fields. She was a peasant girl, in short, with all the consequences. Clearly, Valentina wasn't known for her intelligence, but she had considerable ambition. Otherwise, she wouldn't have gone to the capital to conquer it. Her education was mediocre. She studied at some unknown college. She worked as a maid in a hotel and later became a waitress at a bar. Adriana realized that the girl's family was in dire straits. Her father had suffered a stroke, and her mother worked alone. Among all of Valentina's siblings, she was the oldest. Her younger brothers and sisters were still in school. So only Valentina could help her parents in any way. And she did help, sending almost all of her earned money back home. The girl's behavior impressed Samuel. However, Adriana thought that Valentina had it good. She shared her salary with her family, and Constancio supported her in that. What a clever girl she was, so cunning. And she still looked like a little innocent flower. A wolf in sheep's clothing. The young couple settled in the city and had no intention of returning to the capital. Valentina no longer worked. She took care of the home and attended some courses. Apparently, she was studying to become a fitness trainer, as she had loved sports since childhood. She intended to earn money. That was Valentina's dream, to train people. Make them healthy and beautiful, she would say. But Adriana understood everything. She had seen these types of women throughout her life. They pretend to be busy, constantly studying something to eventually earn money. They study psychology, then manicures, and in the end, they just live off their wealthy husbands. On the other hand, Constancio quickly found a job, which wasn't surprising given his education. He was hired by a local oil company as a corporate lawyer. His salary was more than good. He had an apartment, he could live and be happy. And that's exactly what the young couple did. They lived together, sometimes met with friends, periodically went on vacation, and seemed quite content. Adriana was relieved that they weren't talking about the wedding. Maybe they'd live together for a while and then go their separate ways. Constancio would open his eyes. After all, he wasn't a child anymore. But Adriana tried to gently convey the true state of affairs to her son. However, he didn't like it when his mother said anything negative about his fiancée. "Mom, Valentina is the best person in the world. She's done so much for me, you can't imagine. Only with her do I feel happy." Had that village girl enchanted him somehow? Adriana was frustrated and irritated, but there was nothing she could do. Constancio's character still showed through. He had a penchant for adventure and a passion for excitement. Calm and quiet, Valentina seemed to balance him out. That was a good thing. Still, Adriana didn't dream of such a daughter-in-law. Although maybe it was still too early to worry? After all, the young people weren't even mentioning a wedding yet. And then it turned out that Constancio and Valentina had been husband and wife for a long time. They had quietly gotten married, not telling anyone, and were living happily. It all came out accidentally. Valentina had finally completed her courses and gotten a job at a local sports club. Out of curiosity, Adriana visited the club's webpage and saw a photo of Valentina, under which there was their last name. The woman called her son and demanded that he explain. "Yes, we've gotten married with Valentina." Constancio didn't try to deny it. "She took my last name. Why didn't you tell us anything?" "Why?" Constancio was clearly smiling. "Why should I unnecessarily worry you? I can see that you haven't accepted Valentina. So we decided to get married and have a celebration just for the two of us. We didn't want a grand ceremony." After this conversation, Adriana was torn and had mixed feelings. Well, what now? How could they do this? What are we supposed to say to people? Ever since she first held him in her arms, the woman had been dreaming of the day when she would celebrate her son's wedding. She had even planned her hairstyle and makeup. And the relatives had been asking for a while when the festive event was going to happen. Everyone was counting on a big celebration, and now this disappointment, it was all Valentina's fault. That cunning girl ruined everything. She knew that the groom's parents were against it and was afraid of an open confrontation. So she had arranged everything secretly. Those villagers, and from a large family at that, weren't lacking in cunning. Samuel, however, reacted calmly to their son's decision. "We should respect Constancio's choice. He's already an adult." Respect. He covered his indifference with benevolent reasons, acting wise and noble. But in reality, he simply didn't care about Constancio and his fate. As long as everything was good at work, that's all that mattered to him. But don't worry, hope was not lost yet. Perhaps Constancio would change his mind. Probably even more likely. As long as it wasn't too late, because if that Valentina ended up having a child, it would all be over. For the next 18 years, Constancio would be trapped. And then there was Samuel, acting like a fool, honestly. When Constancio and his wife came to visit them, he would start talking about grandchildren. "So, when will you bless us with heirs?" Valentina would blush shyly, as usual, pretending to be modest. But Constancio would respond openly. "The time will come, and we will. Right now, Valentina wants to work and gain experience. Later, maternity leave will be an option." Well, at least in this aspect, the mother-in-law agreed with the daughter-in-law. Adriana was pleased with Valentina's decision. It was better for them to not have children for a while. It would be easier to part ways if need be. With children, everything becomes more complicated. But it seemed that they didn't intend to break up. Although Adriana did everything in her power from that perspective to help her son see the truth as soon as possible, the woman tried to act delicately. But Constancio was smart. At least when it didn't concern Valentina. He perfectly understood where his mother's intentions were leading. "Do you think this is fair?" She shares her whole salary with her family, living off your money. That's not how things are done in a family. We don't leech off you. Mom, why are you comparing them? You and Valentina's parents are in different situations. They don't have enough money to support their children. Her father hasn't recovered from the stroke. Valentina's mother takes care of him, works, and looks after the kids. How can we not help in this situation? We and your father didn't get everything handed to us. We worked, struggled, and achieved success together. But her parents lived in a village, had children recklessly, and didn't think about the future. Whose fault is that now? No one's at fault. They're not even asking for anything. We're helping because we want to. Mom, I love Valentina, and I want her to be happy. And how can she be happy if her family is in trouble? Then help them. That's just the psychology of people. Adriana continued to grumble. They get used to living off others, that's all. And children, by the way, learn their parents' way of life. Keep that in mind. Children are always similar to their parents. It's in the genes. What about me? Constancio smiled. He always diffused tense situations with jokes. How did you end up with such a slacker? You are serious, driven individuals. And me? And what about you? You're very talented. You're a bright and charismatic individual, not a loafer. If you were a slacker, you would have dropped out of university and not finished your studies. And you'd be living off your parents' money like a spoiled brat, but look at what you've achieved. I'm still a slacker. Constancio playfully hung his head. If it weren't for Valentina, I don't know where I'd be. Constancio often mentioned that Valentina had saved him at the right time. But what had happened? Adriana didn't know. Her son didn't want to talk about it, and trying to pry into his thoughts was futile. He would close up immediately. But the woman suspected that Valentina had orchestrated some situations and taken advantage of difficulties in Constancio's life. Perhaps she had even orchestrated it herself, then stepped in as the savior. She was quite the strategist. Valentina was a strong and resourceful rival. Constancio shut down conversations about his wife immediately. He was clearly under her influence. But this foolishness couldn't go on forever, could it? Constancio hadn't been unintelligent since childhood. Eventually, when the hormones settled down, he would understand everything. And Adriana would be there when that moment came, ready to support and help if needed. Several years passed, but nothing changed in the relationship between the son and the daughter-in-law. On the contrary, they even started planning for a child. At least that's what a colleague told Adriana. She claimed to have seen Valentina at the reproductive health center. What else could she be doing there if not preparing for pregnancy? Maybe she was already expecting a child? They had secrets and didn't reveal anything about themselves. They lived separately, only occasionally visiting. Everything was going completely against what Adriana had planned and dreamed of. But everything else was fine. Her husband continued to work, and Adriana was looking forward to her well-deserved rest. She had worked hard enough. Now it was finally time to relax. Constancio was doing exceptionally well at work. It couldn't be better. Just like his father once did, he even started his own business. Though he wasn't in a rush to leave his current position, it wasn't clear yet whether the business would succeed. Constancio was the daring type, unafraid of responsibility. It was in his nature. He was destined to be an entrepreneur. A true business shark. Oh, this guy was bound to achieve so much. Adriana was proud of her son and loved him with all her heart. If only he could straighten things out in his personal life, then everything would be perfect. Valentina worked at her fitness center, earning modestly and even sending some of her earnings to her family. She had settled in well. Now she was even thinking about starting a family, probably to firmly bind Constancio to her. And he, as always, looked at her with tenderness and adoration, showing no signs of growing wiser. That evening, nothing foreshadowed trouble. Samuel was working late as usual. He had a major inspection from the capital going on, and at times, he literally spent the night in the office, like tonight. He set up a couch in his office and laid down to sleep right there, so as not to waste time on the road in the morning. Adriana had repeatedly asked him to take a well-deserved break. They didn't need much. They lived in a big house, had a bank account, and had stable investment accounts earning interest. They could live and enjoy themselves. Perhaps they should have started traveling? Living life on their own terms and enjoying the fruits of their labor sounded wonderful. After working so hard all her life, it was time to enjoy herself. But Samuel wasn't like that. He found value in immersing himself in his work, reports, estimates, and new projects. Adriana understood her husband and pitied him. He might suffer a heart attack or a stroke. Still, such workaholism in one's mature years wasn't always a blessing. Adriana was home alone. She watched her favorite TV show, read a book, and then chatted with a friend on the phone for a while. She complained once again about her destitute daughter-in-law and about the stubborn young ones. Just as she pressed the hang-up button, the phone rang again. Adriana initially thought it was the same friend calling back. Perhaps she had forgotten to mention something. But the screen displayed an unfamiliar number. Adriana grew uneasy. After all, it was late in the evening. Strangers don't usually call at such times. "Hello," a brisk male voice came through the receiver with a distinctly official tone. "Is Alcalde Constancio your relative?" "This is my son," Adriana said, shivering with horror. Her heart clenched in fear for Constancio. What happened? He was in a car accident. He was driving under the influence, returning from some party. Adriana gasped. It was something that Constancio would do in principle. Despite his exceptional intelligence and abilities, he often acted like a carefree teenager. He was quite capable of getting behind the wheel after having a few drinks. Although both parents had instilled safety rules in him since childhood, but Constancio was Constancio, and that said it all. He always had a streak of recklessness, and he often disregarded many rules. How is he? Is he alive? Adriana's heart pounded in her chest so intensely that it felt like it could burst out at any moment. He's alive. He had minor injuries. Medical personnel are assisting him right now. However, his spouse is in a more critical condition. You're her mother-in-law, right? We need someone to come to the hospital, bring the girl's documents, and answer some questions from the doctors. We managed to contact her parents, but they live far away. So, of course, Adriana replied immediately, feverishly pondering how to get into Constancio and his wife's apartment, where the documents were. Somewhere, she had left the keys, if only she could find them now. The most important thing was that Constancio was alive and relatively well. The police officer had said that the driver had suffered minor injuries. Adriana was worried about Valentina, though. It seemed like she had been seriously injured. Adriana had dreamed of her son divorcing his wife, but she definitely didn't want such a fate for her daughter-in-law. Adriana finally found the keys to her mother's apartment, where the young couple lived, called a taxi, and only then realized that she hadn't told her husband about the incident. She thought for a moment and then decided not to bother him so late. She would inform him later, once the situation became clearer. The most important thing was that Constancio was alive and relatively well. The rest of the problems would be solved as they came. Adriana was alone in her son and daughter-in-law's apartment for the first time. She had occasionally visited them before, on holidays, on Constancio and Valentina's birthdays, on New Year's. The daughter-in-law always set a beautiful table. Adriana had to admit that her son's wife was a wonderful hostess. Yes, Valentina was a really good housekeeper. There wasn't a speck of dust in the rooms, everything was in its place. Adriana entered the young couple's bedroom and, overcoming a sudden embarrassment, opened the wardrobe. It felt a bit awkward to behave like this in someone else's apartment. So, what might a person need in the hospital? A nightshirt, pajamas, and a towel. Adriana frantically gathered a bag for her daughter-in-law. She found a folder with Valentina's documents in the closet. Thoughts crowded her mind, jostled each other, and obscured her focus. Constancio caused the accident. He's unharmed himself, but his wife. I wonder if it's as serious as the policeman said. Maybe he exaggerated the situation. But what if, on the contrary, he downplayed the impact? What if Constancio is seriously injured now? What will happen to him? Adriana finally packed her things and called a taxi. It was already late, and the driver quickly brought her to the hospital through the empty streets. In the hospital's lobby, she immediately saw her son. He was sitting on a bench, his head hanging low. He was pale, with bandaged wrists, but alive. Adriana rushed towards him, and they embraced tightly. "Mom, I'm so guilty. I feel guilty that Valentina is on the operating table right now. Her head is injured. The doctors say there's almost no chance. If something happens to her, I won't live. I'm telling you for sure, I won't." "Calm down," Adriana urged her son, trying to calm her own horror. "Maybe it will still be okay. Valentina is healthy, she has a strong body. And anyway, you're both at fault, not just you. Why did she sit next to you in the car when you were drunk? She's responsible for this too. What are you saying?" Constancio pulled away and looked at his mother with wide open eyes. "It's my fault. Only mine. There's no forgiveness for me. I'll leave her if she survives, otherwise, I'm done." At that moment, a person in uniform approached Constancio. "You have received medical assistance, now you need to go to the department to provide your statement." "I'm coming with you," Adriana exclaimed, suddenly realizing the whole situation. She was afraid for her son. Yes, he was almost unharmed physically, but his mental state left much to be desired. And now they were taking him to the police station. It was unlikely that the police officers would spare the feelings of the person responsible for the accident. "That's unnecessary," the police officer firmly replied. "Outsiders have no business there." Constancio left, and the worried Adriana started looking for a doctor to find out something about her daughter-in-law's condition. No matter how she felt about Valentina, she genuinely felt sorry for the girl. And the once unsympathetic mother-in-law fervently prayed that Valentina would survive. Otherwise, Constancio was too impulsive and might have done something foolish. He was so emotional. Oh, why did he get behind the wheel drunk? The attending physician for Valentina was currently in surgery, fighting for the girl's life with a whole medical team. The paramedic, who was already aware of the situation, mistook Adriana for the injured girl's relative and generously shared the details of what had happened with her. Her husband, this poor girl's guy, drove a car drunk. They say he was going about 200 kilometers per hour when he crashed right into a pole. He managed to get himself out of the impact, but his instincts kicked in, and the full force of the impact hit the passenger seat. Her whole body is injured, that damn scoundrel killed her. And will she survive? Adriana was pricked by harsh words against her son, but she needed to get used to it. Constancio really was at fault. Well, who knows here? It's 50-50. I've been working here for a long time and have seen it many times. Miracles happen. Hopeless cases survive and recover. But it also happens the other way around. Everything seems fine, but a person slips away. Yes, please wait here in the waiting area. Leo Santos will come out to you after the surgery. All right, thank you. The surgery went on for a very long time. Adriana managed to call her husband and tell him everything. Samuel immediately rushed to the hospital. Waiting together somehow felt calmer. Anxiety and fear were divided between them, but soon Adriana asked her husband to go to the police station. Constancio is all alone there, in an unknown condition. Who knows what might happen to him? Her husband nodded and left. Adriana was alone again. Finally, a doctor came out to her, tired and somewhat irritable. Adriana stared intently at his face, trying to understand what news this person was bringing. Are you Valentina's relative? He inquired. Adriana nodded. Well, we've done everything we could. The girl survived the surgery, now it all depends on her body. If she gets through the critical 3 days, she'll live. However, the recovery process will be very long. But there are no guarantees. Is there anything that can be done to increase her chances? We have done everything. We've already utilized all our resources. But we're not in the capital. We don't have that kind of equipment or those kinds of medications. We will get everything, no matter the amount of money. Just tell us. Nothing is needed right now. Just patience, we need to wait. And so began the agonizing days of waiting. Adriana flinched at every phone call. What if it's from the hospital? Constancio was under investigation. The outcome of the case depended on whether Valentina would survive. He couldn't stay in the apartment. Everything there reminded him of his wife. So he was living under his parents' watchful eyes in their home. The young man wasn't eating or drinking, and it seemed he wasn't even sleeping. He had become thin, pale, and emaciated. Constancio was silent, but his mother could see that her son was torturing himself. He blamed himself for what had happened. He reproached and scolded himself. Of course, it was all justified, but it hurt Adriana deeply to see her child in such a state. She couldn't find the words to comfort him. He barely saw or heard anyone. It seemed that the only thing keeping him connected to this world was the possibility that he could be of help to Valentina when she recovered. After all, she would need assistance and rehabilitation. Adriana was setting her son's mind on the fact that he needed to be in good shape when Valentina woke up. They still had to help her get back on her feet. They would need money and strength. But the woman herself wasn't sure if her daughter-in-law would survive. Every day, Adriana called the hospital at least once to ask about the girl's condition. There was no good news. Valentina was experiencing periodic seizures, and her life was literally hanging by a thread. Finally, the critical period passed. Valentina was still alive, but she hadn't regained consciousness. The girl was in a coma. Well, we can't do anything about it, the doctor said, shrugging his shoulders. It's unknown how long such a condition can last. Perhaps the girl will never come out of the coma. But there must be something. We are sustaining her life, following established protocols. We have limited resources in our region, and we are far from modern medicine. So, can't she be transferred somewhere? Will she be helped in the capital? It's worth a try, but there are no guarantees. This is by no means a cheap undertaking. We're not destitute, we'll find the money. I doubt it, the doctor said, shaking his head. The cost is simply astronomical. Transporting a person in such a condition would cost as much as a 3-bedroom apartment in the center of our city. Adriana still asked for an estimate to be prepared for her. Leo nodded in agreement. It will be ready by the evening. They'll give you a call. Until the evening, Adriana lived with hope. The doctor had said there was a chance. She would do everything to ensure her son's happiness and a peaceful future. Who could have thought just a month ago that Adriana would be making such an effort for her daughter-in-law? On the other hand, she pitied the girl. She pitied her deeply, that was true. But Adriana was doing everything she could for Constancio. Her heart turned cold at the thought that her son might harm himself. The amount mentioned in the evening turned out to be astronomical. They weren't destitute, but they weren't multimillionaires either, and the bill was indeed in the millions. It was an unattainable sum for their family, even if they sold all their belongings and emptied their bank account. The hope that had flickered in the morning finally faded completely by evening. Adriana sank helplessly into a chair and covered her head with her hands. What should we do? Passing by like a ghost, Constancio walked past, his cheeks hollowed, his skin taking on a painful shade. Guilt was eating away at him from the inside. Should she have told him about the money? What was the point? Where would he get it? If Constancio found out, it would be another reason for self-loathing. He couldn't even provide the money for his beloved's treatment. The next day, as usual, Adriana went to the hospital. They sometimes let her into the intensive care unit, where Valentina was laying. She didn't tell her son about these visits. He would surely want to see his wife too. But Valentina was in such a state that this sight would only further devastate Constancio, who was barely holding on. Once, health professionals asked Adriana for money in order to ensure that Constancio would not be allowed near his wife. She reluctantly paid to be sure. Valentina sometimes murmured something in her sleep. Adriana listened but couldn't make out anything. More often, Valentina lay quietly and peacefully. If it weren't for her gently rising and falling chest, you could almost think that she was no longer in this world. A sharp pity clenched Adriana's heart every time she saw her daughter-in-law. Now the woman was puzzled. Why hadn't she loved her this way before? She was friendly, capable, and hard-working. And Constancio loved her so much. She should have become friends with her and found common ground. Poor girl. A daughter of parents with many children who were preoccupied with their younger siblings. Valentina's mother came only once. It was understandable. She had no money, a sick husband to take care of, and a bunch of children. She didn't have time to sit at the bedside of her eldest daughter in the hospital, and it didn't make much sense anyway. Adriana had seen a program about people who had come out of comas. Many of them claimed that, while they were helpless, they heard and felt what was happening around them. So Adriana often asked Valentina for forgiveness, and she also told her about Constancio's suffering and how they were all waiting for her recovery. Everything will be different now, Adriana promised. We'll live as one family, supporting each other. Just get well soon. Suddenly, Valentina might hear something. She should have known that everyone was waiting for her. Valentina suddenly became agitated, which didn't surprise Adriana. It had happened many times before. The girl started murmuring again. Adriana leaned closer to her face, trying to catch the words. Maybe she could understand what dream Valentina was having. Antonio. Antonio Cano. Antonio Cano? Adriana asked, seeking confirmation. Valentina had pronounced something so clearly for the first time. Could it be that she was emerging from her coma? Antonio, he will help. Adriana rushed to find the doctors. Who knew Valentina had spoken? Perhaps it was a good sign. However, when Leo, who came to see Valentina, looked at the readings on the devices, he shook his head negatively. No, she's still in a coma. The instruments register brief moments of consciousness returning. It happens sometimes. But unfortunately, it doesn't mean much. The girl is stable, but there are no improvements expected, and a miracle is unlikely to happen at this point. Time is passing, and in her situation, time means a lot. Adriana returned home in a state of disarray. Antonio Cano. She had memorized the name well. Valentina had said he would help. Was it incoherent rambling or a plea for help? The woman couldn't forget Valentina's words. No matter what, she was determined to find out who Antonio Cano was. Could he truly help the girl? The question was, how do I find this mysterious person? Who was he, anyway? She could ask Constancio, but it was better not to disturb him. He was already working with therapists. There seemed to be progress, and a thoughtless word could set back the specialist's efforts. Adriana would find out everything on her own. She decided to start by calling Valentina's mother. Of course, she was angry with Constancio and, consequently, all his relatives, for understandable reasons. But what could she do? If there was any way to help Valentina, Adriana would take that step. However, Valentina's mother knew nothing about Antonio Cano. She cried on the phone as she spoke about her daughter and her words. She even regretted calling her. She was sparing her son but hadn't considered the feelings of the unfortunate girl's mother. In the future, she needed to be more careful. After some thought, Adriana decided to use the internet. But here too, she hit a roadblock. There were so many Antonio Canos. Thousands of men of all ages with that name, making it difficult to find the right one. Still, Adriana didn't give up. She examined the social pages of these people, hoping to find some connection to Valentina. help came from an unexpected source. One day, as usual, she went to the hospital to see her daughter-in-law. Now Adriana listened closely to Valentina's casual words and phrases. Who knew, maybe she would get another hint. But it was in vain. Valentina didn't say anything like that again. Mostly, she was lying quietly, seemingly in a deep sleep. One morning in the intensive care unit, Adriana spotted a young woman with tear-filled eyes. "And who are you, actually?" Adriana asked the visitor. "Who let you in? Are you a relative?" "Cousin," the girl nodded. "And you must be the mother-in-law, I suppose? I've heard that you frequently show up here, worrying about Valentina, helping the staff take care of her, and buying everything she needs. Even though you're the mother of that scoundrel, I don't hold any negativity towards you. I think you raised him right, and he made his own choices." "Nice to meet you," Adriana automatically replied. "Oh, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Tina. We grew up together in the same village as Valentina. We were really close, practically like relatives. We went to the capital together to make something of ourselves. But lucky me, I finished my studies, found a good job, got settled there, and well, her life took a different turn." "So, you and Valentina interacted often in the capital?" Adriana clarified. "Of course, we were inseparable. Our paths only diverged a bit when we both got married. But she's still someone very dear to me. I came to visit as soon as I could after all of this happened. I was actually on bed rest at the maternity ward when it all unfolded, so I couldn't come earlier. But now, I finally managed to get away." "I see. Tina, I have a very strange question for you." And Adriana told Valentina's cousin about Antonio Cano. You know, Valentina sometimes mutters incoherent things, but this time she clearly said, "Antonio Cano will help. I'm trying to find him, but..." "Wait, I know who he is." Tina brightened. "Well, of course, why didn't I think of it before? He's a rock star, a very famous person who fills stadiums. You've definitely heard his songs, even if you don't like rock music, they're played everywhere." "Well, how is this music celebrity connected to Valentina?" "Well, he was head over heels in love with Valentina. Back then, Antonio was gaining popularity, but he was still wealthy and influential. He dedicated songs to her, he was willing to do anything for her. Maybe even now, too. But she chose Constancio. I'm really sorry for saying that, but I didn't like Constancio then either. He seemed carefree, somewhat childish. But you can't dictate the heart. Valentina fell in love. If I were in her shoes, I wouldn't have hesitated or had any doubts. Antonio, he's quite a person. He's talented, kind, and generous. Wow, that's something. So, Valentina didn't randomly mention his name?" "Of course not." "Do you know how to reach Antonio?" "No. I don't have his phone number or contacts." "I see, I'll find him myself then. I'll check where he's performing and go to his concert. From there, I'll find a way to reach him and tell him what happened to Valentina. Maybe he really can help." Tina looked at Adriana with admiration. "You're a wonderful person. It's strange that your son turned out the way he did. I would join you, but I need to be with my child." "Thank you, dear. You've already helped a lot," Adriana smiled at her. "I'll manage, don't doubt it." Now Adriana had a goal, to find Antonio and talk to him. If Valentina believed he could help, then it must have been true. She had a concrete and achievable task ahead of her. She would handle it, of course. "Everything will be all right, Valentina," Adriana gently stroked the thin palm of her future daughter-in-law. "Everything will be all right." Adriana told her family that she was going to visit a friend. However, she had already bought a ticket for Antonio Cano's performance. He was currently on tour, and his concerts were taking place in the coming days. That's where Adriana would catch him and break through to him, no matter the cost. Samuel was surprised. It's strange, at times like this, you're going to visit a friend. What if something happens to Valentina? It's an uncertain time indeed, and that's why I'm going. I've exhausted myself with nerves. I need a reset. Luz invited me to stay with her for a couple of days. She says we'll stroll along the waterfront and have heart-to-heart conversations. I need this. But what about Valentina? Samuel repeated. Valentina is stable. She's in a deep coma, but her life isn't threatened right now. I talked to the doctor. Keep an eye on Constancio, okay? Remind him from time to time that he's needed by us and, of course, by Valentina. That Valentina will need him soon. Samuel nodded. You're right, you need a distraction. You've taken on the most in this situation. I'm working, and Constancio, well, he's pretty much stuck in a rut. You really need a reset. Adriana made it to her destination by plane. It had been a while since she had traveled alone. It felt unusual to travel this way in solitude. She booked a room in a hotel. Indeed, her former classmate Luz lived here, but they hadn't communicated in a long time, let alone become friends. Meeting with her friend was more of a legend for them. Antonio Cano's concert was scheduled for the evening. During the day, Adriana took a stroll along the famous waterfront, taking in the fresh air and the views. And she pondered, intensely considering how to reach Antonio. If it wouldn't work out now, she could try to find him in another city. However, the doctor had made it clear that the longer Valentina remained in a coma, the fewer chances she had of recovery. Time was against her, and so to speak, against all of them. What did Adriana want to ask Antonio for? To help with money and to arrange for Valentina to be transferred to a hospital in the capital? The doctor said they had the resources to rehabilitate such severely ill patients. In their town, Valentina had practically no chance. She would stay in a coma and slowly fade away. Adriana couldn't allow that. How would Constancio live with such guilt on his shoulders? Yes, it wasn't just about that, of course. While Valentina was in the hospital, Adriana was reconsidering the situation. She recalled certain episodes and increasingly realized that Valentina was indeed a kind, good-hearted girl. There couldn't be a better match for her carefree Constancio. Now, Adriana couldn't understand her own behavior. Why had she suddenly been hostile towards her future daughter-in-law? Why did she want to see the daughter of wealthy parents beside Constancio? It was all nonsense, relics of the past. Now, Adriana only felt warm emotions toward Valentina, attachment, tenderness, and sympathy. And of course, she worried greatly about the girl's future. No matter what happens, they wouldn't abandon her. As long as Valentina recovered. In the evening, there was a concert at the local concert hall. It seemed that Antonio was indeed quite popular. Several doors were open for the audience to enter, each with a long line waiting. Adriana joined the queue. The audience was diverse. There were very young teenagers, almost children, and people of a rather mature age. So Adriana didn't stand out. Some people were laughing, and some were humming songs from Antonio's repertoire, it seemed. They seemed to be carefree people who had come to enjoy their favorite performer's show and have a pleasant evening. But Adriana was here with a mission. While standing in line, she examined numerous posters of Antonio. He was a handsome man, just about 10 to 15 years older than Valentina and Constancio. He had a pleasant appearance and seemingly kind, not indifferent, eyes. She hoped he wouldn't dismiss her. She hoped he would help. After all, who knows? Maybe Valentina and her cousin sincerely believed in his otherworldly love and genuine feelings. But in reality, Antonio probably had plenty of Valentinas and quite a few more. Adriana sighed. She had put so much hope into this person. There was no one else she could turn to. The concert itself lasted for about 2 hours, and Antonio gave it his all. He exuded an incredible energy that the audience absorbed. They shouted his name, sang along, and danced. Adriana didn't even notice how she got caught up in the collective mood. Strangely enough, she liked the songs. She didn't usually enjoy modern performers. She had her biases against them, which were unjustified. Antonio's songs had everything: meaning, catchy melodies, and a rhythm that charged. Many of the compositions seemed vaguely familiar to her. Of course, Tina had said that Antonio's music was everywhere. She had surely heard his songs before. During the intermission, Adriana went to the nearest flower shop and bought a bouquet there. It was quite expensive. Just in case, she slipped a note inside. Ideally, she wanted to be able to tell everything to Antonio herself. But who knew how things would go? In the note, she briefly outlined Valentina's situation. There were no details, just a request for Antonio to come to the back door of the concert hall at a specific time. She would be waiting for him there. The second part of the concert was as energetically charged as the first. The crowd rejoiced at seeing their idol. Adriana inadvertently absorbed the mood of the people around her. Now, Antonio seemed almost omnipotent to her. He would surely help Valentina. And finally, the opportune moment arrived. The last song played, and people rushed toward the stage. Many were bringing flowers to the performer, some just wanted to shake his hand. Antonio didn't hurry to leave. He seemed to want to interact with the audience too. Several young men in the crowd noticed the elderly woman making her way towards the stage and helped her. Some of them cleared a path through the crowd, while others gently guided her forward. And there she was, by the stage, holding her bouquet, while Antonio looked at her and warmly smiled. This was the moment of truth, and it couldn't have been better. Valentina is in trouble. Adriana shouted loudly. Valentina, who used to work as a waitress in the bar. You met her there once upon a time. The smile slowly faded from Antonio's face, and concern filled his eyes. The elderly woman rejoiced. He remembered the girl. And it seemed that Valentina still meant something to him. Adriana was skilled at reading emotions and could tell that her words had a strong impact on him. Wait here, Antonio requested. Then he rushed to one of the guys on stage, dressed in a black shirt and black pants. Apparently, he was an assistant. Antonio said something to him, and the guy nodded. Adriana was already being pushed away from the stage. Antonio continued interacting with his fans, but his face was no longer as carefree and happy as before. And then, a couple of minutes later, the same guy from the stage approached Adriana. Hello, Antonio asked you to wait for him in the dressing room. Follow me. The dressing room was a huge room with many mirrors and sofas. Bags and clothing items were scattered everywhere. Adriana cautiously took a seat in a chair. Wait here, the escort said politely. Antonio will finish on stage and come back here, but I need to leave. Alone, Adriana spent about 40 minutes there. The crowd still clung to their idol, and then Antonio came. He was tired, his shirt was soaked through, and he looked concerned. He immediately grabbed a bottle of water from the table and almost drank it all in one gulp. After that, he sat across from Adriana and looked straight into her eyes. Let's get straight to the point. What happened to Valentina? She's an important person to me. And Adriana told him. It was hard to admit certain things to this person. For instance, her initial attitude towards her future daughter-in-law and her own son's terrible actions. Antonio listened attentively and didn't interrupt or reproach her. He was just listening and occasionally nodding. Next to this strong man, Adriana surprisingly felt calm. Now that he knew everything, everything would be fine. She had done the most important thing. She had reached Antonio Cano. He would surely come up with something. He was handsome with the right traits, a confident gaze, charisma, money, and talent. Tina, Valentina's cousin, was right. How could a young girl like Valentina prefer someone like him over Constancio? If Adriana were younger, she might have fallen in love with him herself. It was amazing. This fact once again proved that Valentina truly loved Constancio. Adriana had suspected her of greed. How foolish. Yes, if Valentina had stayed with Antonio, she would have easily solved all her financial problems. And even her family issues. Poor girl, Antonio said when Adriana finished. Who would have thought she'd have such a fate? Your son, excuse me, acted extremely irresponsibly, to put it mildly. I never really liked him. I couldn't understand what Valentina saw in him, but she loved him with all her heart. Maybe she even pitied him somewhere. She has a very kind heart. So, will you help her? Adriana asked. She wasn't planning to defend her son or convince Antonio otherwise. Her goal was quite different. Of course. I don't have that kind of money readily available right now, but I will arrange a charity concert and ask my friends to do the same. We'll have the funds in about 3 days. And I will also arrange the transportation of Valentina and her admission to the clinic. I will find the best doctors for her. We will get her out of this. You're a wonderful person. Tears welled up in Adriana's eyes. She cried out of relief and joy. Could it be that everything had worked out? Could this influential, strong man really save Valentina? Do you know our story? Curly Eve suddenly asked. A light smile touched his lips, instantly brightening his masculine face. In broad strokes, Adriana smiled in response. But I would like to know more. I wasn't as famous back then, but I was already performing and already earning. I already had my own audience. I often went to the Rock Bar. I had many friends there. And I liked the atmosphere. It was an amazing place. But now, unfortunately, it's not the same. Antonio immediately noticed the pretty waitress with wide open eyes. She was special. She radiated some incredible energy. Valentina always smiled at the customers, no matter how tired she was. With just a look or a word, she could calm down a demanding client and make them smile. She was caring, gentle, and considerate. And beautiful, of course. One day, Antonio realized that he intentionally timed his visits to the Rock Bar to coincide with her shifts. She had a strong influence on him. He wanted to see her eyes and hear her voice. Sometimes they exchanged jokes, sometimes they laughed together. But Antonio never dared to openly express his affection. He feared that it might disrupt the ease of their budding relationship. Under the spell of the young, beautiful waitress, Antonio even wrote several songs that quickly became hits. She attracted and inspired him. But the difference in age and social status kept Antonio from confessing his feelings. What if Valentina became scared? If only she had shown some special affection, not just her usual friendliness, Antonio would have been the happiest person in the world. He would have confessed his feelings to Valentina immediately. He could have made her life bright, carefree, and pleasant. But no, Valentina clearly didn't see him as a potential partner. And then Antonio got a competitor, which pushed him towards more decisive actions. It was Constancio, a student. He often appeared at the bar, somewhat unkempt and with a vacant gaze. The young man tried to get drunk to oblivion as quickly as possible, and then someone from his friends would carry his unconscious body to a taxi. Antonio understood well that people don't just get drunk like that almost every day. The young man clearly had some trouble. No worries, he's young, he'll come to his senses. Calm down. Who hasn't been through such things at that age? And maybe this behavior would lead him into trouble, depending on how things went. But Valentina. The beauty Valentina somehow couldn't remain indifferent to the plight of this guest. Antonio watched with envy as she sat next to the guy, stroking his shoulders and saying soothing things. And Constancio, at first, seemed like he didn't even notice her support, but then he started smiling at her, responding to something. Their conversations lasted for hours. Antonio didn't know what they talked about, but he certainly understood where things were heading. A relationship was clearly starting between the young people. And Antonio was definitely not okay with that. By that time, he had already realized that he had the strongest feelings for Valentina that he had ever felt for anyone. She's special, I still believe that. There's no one else like her. Antonio shook his head, looking at Adriana. She simply nodded in response. It was a pity that she herself understood this too late. Her future niece-in-law was truly a wonder, sincere, warm, and kind. Gradually, under Valentina's influence and support, Constancio started to recover. He transformed from a lost, perpetually drunk guy into a very handsome young man, witty, cheerful, and vibrant. He and Valentina started dating, and only then did Antonio decide to act openly. There wasn't much time for contemplation. So one day, he simply asked Valentina to sit at his table, something that had happened before. The girl often sat down with regular visitors, chatted, laughed. She enjoyed socializing. "Well, and I told her everything about myself," Antonio said, shaking his head. "Right then and there. Interestingly, I write songs, including ones about love. I've never complained about a lack of eloquence, but at that moment, I couldn't string two words together. I stumbled and tried to formulate my sentences correctly. And she was sitting there, looking at me seriously, and she didn't say a word. She let me speak and didn't interrupt. It was such a moment, something amazing. Later, I wrote a hit song under the impression of that. I even played it today. The crowd always responds to it with enthusiasm. It must touch people, probably." Valentina listened to Antonio, smiled sadly at him, and said what the man already knew: she loved Constancio, and he loved her. Without her, he would spiral out of control again, plummeting at a furious speed into the abyss. It turned out that Constancio had experienced unrequited love. Some married adult woman had captured his heart and mind. They met and started dating. The young and handsome guy was a way for this woman to escape her dull everyday life, a passing amusement. But Constancio fell in love for real. The woman, as expected, dismissed the young admirer when their affair bored her. She found herself a new companion. Constancio pursued her, but when he realized it was futile, he understood that the woman had never had serious feelings for him. He started drinking excessively, almost got expelled from university, and didn't talk to anyone. Valentina saved him back then. If it weren't for her, Constancio wouldn't have stopped. He had no chance on his own. So she pulled him out, and he practically led her to the other side. Adriana paused to think. She did feel that something was happening with her son when he lived in the capital city. But over the phone, Constancio reported in a casual tone that everything was fine and then quickly hung up. And here it turns out that things were quite different in reality. It was a personal drama. Valentina had saved him, brought him back to life. As a mother, she should have been praying for her. But the young couple hadn't told her anything. Perhaps Constancio didn't want to. And Valentina herself, it seemed, had no desire to highlight her deed. After learning the truth, Adriana felt even more compassion for her future niece-in-law. Imagine rejecting someone like Antonio for Constancio's sake. She rescued the guy from trouble and left the capital city with him. Constancio was lucky. Lucky in a way that rarely happens to anyone in the world. The burden of guilt that now weighed on Constancio's shoulders must have been colossal. It was a warm September day. A group was walking along the waterfront. Two couples, an elderly spouse and a young man and woman. Constancio was gently supporting Valentina by the elbow. She was still very slender, but her eyes were meaningful again, burning with a thirst for life. They had traveled to another city. The girl had never strolled along this wonderful waterfront before and was now enjoying the views that opened up before her. Valentina had finally recovered enough to be allowed to travel, not too far and without a change in climate. She was tired of the hospital walls, where she had spent so much time. She longed for change and a different environment, so her family arranged this trip for her. Adriana had chosen the location. Why not? It was nearby, and she herself had been amazed by the waterfront on her previous visit to this city. Even Samuel, leaving all his affairs behind, went with them. Antonio kept his promise. He organized several charity concerts. Musical friends helped him. Many of them did the same. Adriana was very grateful to these people. She had always thought that people like them, these celebrities we see only on TV screens, were capricious and selfish. They didn't care about others' troubles. But look at how it turned out. It seemed that they were kind and sensitive men and women. The necessary sum was collected in record time. Besides everything else, Antonio took care of all the logistics for transporting Valentina and getting her into the right clinic. It wasn't easy, as there was always a long waiting list for doctors who dealt with such cases. People from all over the country flocked to this center, despite the exorbitant fees. They practiced experimental methods here. The project wasn't supported by the government budget, at least not yet, but the results were inspiring. Seeing Valentina on the hospital bed, the mature, strong man almost burst into tears. He looked at her with such tenderness and gently stroked her hands. Adriana's heart broke when she saw this scene. Antonio still had some feelings for Valentina. He had a wife and 2 children, but clearly, something had remained. Adriana and Constancio settled near the medical center where Valentina was now being treated. Samuel went back home. He needed to work. But the mother and son stayed close and visited the patient every day. The day Valentina regained consciousness remained etched in Adriana's memory. In the morning, nothing hinted at such joy. Adriana and Constancio were getting ready for the hospital, as usual, when they received that call. They were asked to come as soon as possible because Valentina had opened her eyes and was trying to speak. As soon as they burst into the room, the girl recognized them. She felt relief at having her loved ones nearby, and then joy. The doctors hadn't provided any guarantees, warning that Valentina might become a completely different person. They even asserted that this was likely. But there she was, the same Valentina, standing before an astonished Adriana and Constancio. There was no doubt, Valentina was still herself. Everything would be fine from now on. Antonio also visited Valentina in the hospital after she woke up. Adriana didn't know what they talked about, nor was it her concern. But she did entertain the thought that the girl might leave for Antonio or simply leave. And why wouldn't she? After what Constancio had done, she had every right to be upset with him. Valentina had almost died due to her husband's recklessness. Adriana could have understood if her future niece-in-law had made such a decision. But Valentina stayed with her husband. She loved Constancio despite everything and harbored no resentment or anger toward him. "I'm to blame too," Valentina said. "I saw that he had been drinking and still sat down next to him. I didn't dissuade him from his dangerous act. I didn't even try. I guess I just wanted to get home as soon as possible. I thought everything would be fine. We both could have died. We're such fools." The recovery was long and difficult. Adriana, Constancio, and even the perpetually busy Samuel were all there for Valentina at that moment. They helped her and supported her. Sometimes they had to make her do exercises through pain and tears and then console her. But the results were impressive. Valentina first sat up, then stood, and eventually started walking. And now she was almost back to her old self, just very weak and not gaining much weight. But the doctors said it would all come back. They praised both the patient and her support group. Constancio changed a lot because of this situation. He became more mature, responsible, and serious. He hardly left Valentina's side now, anticipating her every wish, protecting her. The youthful recklessness, carelessness, and disregard for rules and boundaries were gone. Adriana found great joy in observing this transformation. The accident that could have shattered the lives of so many people became a serious lesson for everyone. Adriana learned a lot about her future niece-in-law and now sees her with completely different eyes. The woman herself had also changed significantly. She had become more attentive and tolerant towards people, learned to notice others' sorrows and hardships, and even developed a passion for rock music in her old age. Adriana was a devoted fan of Antonio Cano. His songs, as it turned out, were so profound and carried so much meaning. One of Antonio's songs was playing in her headphones at that very moment. Adriana smiled.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.